Hi, this is Simon from Tokyo Productions and welcome to another tutorial for Motion 5. And today we're going to be looking at creating something a bit like this. So I guess that's some kind of scientific instrument or other. This is another tutorial that's based on an original concept by Andrew Kramer, but because we're doing this in Motion rather than After Effects, it involves quite a few completely different techniques. So let's have a look at how it's done. I've got a new project here. It's 1920-1080, it's 24 frames a second, and I've made it 6 seconds long. My first step is to create a kind of plasma effect that's going to go in the center of the instrument. So I'm going to select the circle tool by hitting C. I'm going to hit F7 for the HUD. Let's have a white outline, no fill, and a width of 1. Let's hold down the Shift and the Option or Alt key, and let's drag out a circle like that. Close up the HUD, center up the circle by hitting the Reset button. Let's come to the library, Command 2, Filters, Distortion. And finally, I think I've found a use for this one called Disk Warp. So let's apply that. And you'll notice I've got my overlays here, Command /, which give me this little control here. Now, if I drag downwards, you'll see that I can distort the edge of my circle. If I go too far, I get this blob, which I don't want. So I want to go just either side of that blob. And then I'll use the outer ring just to increase the scale of that distortion. Come to the inspector, F1 for its transform. Let's select the Z transform, right click, add parameter behavior, oscillate. Let's set an amplitude of 360 and a speed of 100. And that gives us this effect. Let's take that circle, duplicate it, F2 for the behaviors again. Let's change that phase to 50. Got 2 of those now. We could increase that speed a bit to 150 maybe. Let's duplicate it again, Command D, F2 for the behaviors. Let's change the phase to 100 and let's increase the speed to 200. And now we've got something that looks like that. Then I'm going to select the group, Command 2 for the library, Filters, Blur, and I'm going to look for Radial Blur, and I'll apply that to the group. F3 for the inspector. Let's turn off crop, and let's set the mix value to 50%. What's nice about that radial blur at 50% is it gives us this kind of glow effect. So if I turned up to 100, you'll see that I'm just blurring it. It doesn't look nearly as interesting. At 50%, it's got a nice glow as well as a sort of motion blur type effect. So let's call that group Plasma, close it all up, and let's hide it. Next, I want to concentrate on making those main spinning elements. So I'm going to make a new group, Command-Shift-N, and I'm going to select the rectangle tool, F7 for the HUD, turn off outline, turn on fill, and I'm going to draw a very, very narrow rectangle all the way down the center of the screen. And I'll center it up and close up the HUD. Come to the shape, F4, come to its geometry. I'll set the X values to 0 and the Y values to 540, so 0, 540, 0, minus 540, 0, minus 540. Then I'll come back to its style, and here I'll set the feather value to 1000. Then I'll come to the group, F1 to come to the properties. I'll come down to crop and turn that on. The left value I'll set to 960, that's half the width of the screen. And the top I'll set to 1080. Then I'll hit L to make a replicator. I'll set the shape to circle, the arrangement to outline, and down here under cell controls I'll select align angle. Then I want to come to the scale here, and let's set the X scale to 15. Then I'm going to come back to the replicator radius, and I'm just going to scroll up in that radius value till those funny things disappear out of the center. So around about 460 in this instance is doing the job. And now you'll notice that I can create this array using the points slider. Let's leave that at 6, and let's make in this same group a new circle. So C for the circle tool, F7 for the HUD. Let's turn off fill, let's turn on outline, let's set the width to something like 25. Let's hold down the Alt or Option key and the Shift key, and from the center let's drag out a circle roughly that sort of size. And we'll close up the HUD. Next we want to make sure to center up the circle, so come to its transform and hit the reset button. And then we're going to add an image mask to that circle, so that's Command Shift M. And we're going to take the replicator and drag it into the mask source well. And now the replicator is cutting out the circle. Let's call the replicator cutter. Let's call this group blade outer. Come back to the replicator. Let's increase that X value till we get something like that. And I just want to point out that we can also use the angle control here under the cell controls, and we can get some pretty interesting results if we do that. You can see that I can now get something that looks much more like a rotor. I've got an angle of about 50, and that I think looks quite nice. I'll come back to the circle itself, and I think I might increase that width to 40. Then I'm going to duplicate that blade outer, so that's Command D, and I'm going to call it blade middle. F1 for its transform, and I'm going to reduce the scale till we get something like that, just sitting nicely inside there. Let's close up blade outer. Let's come to the cutter for blade middle, come to the replicator itself. We can maybe increase the number of points this time to 9, and that X value, let's reduce that down to about 20. And let's just play with that angle control, because I want something that looks a bit different. So I'm going to increase that to round about, let's try 60. You see I've got something that looks really quite nice and complex. I think I pretty much like that. And then let's close that up. Let's duplicate that again, and let's call it blade inner. Open it up. Let's hit F1 for its transform, and again let's reduce that scale down a bit till we get to there. Come to the cutter, come to the replicator. Let's increase the number of segments points again to 13. And again let's just play with that X value. Looks quite nice. And maybe the angle again. Let's go the other way. Let's go to 144. See how that looks. Okay, so I want to add some animation to these. So I'm going to come to the cutter for blade outer, select the Z rotation, right click, add parameter behavior, rate, and I'm going to set a rate of -150. That spins that around. I'm going to take that rate and Alt or Option drag it to the cutter for blade middle, and let's increase that rate to -200 in that instance. Looks good. Same thing for blade inner. I'm going to Alt drag that rate to the cutter, and this time let's spin it the other way, so let's go for 200. And I think you can see we've got something that looks really pretty complex already. So next I'd like to look at creating a different kind of ring effect. And to do that, I'm going to duplicate blade outer. So Command D, and I'm going to call it dots outer. And then I'm going to move it to the top of the stack. That's Command Shift backwards square bracket. Let's close up some of the other groups just to avoid confusion. And let's look at this dots outer group. So F1 for its scale, and I'm just going to scale it in so it sits between those two outermost rings. Then I'm going to select the circle itself, F4 for the shape properties, and the brush type here under outline I'm going to set to airbrush. Then I'm going to crank up this spacing till I get dots. Now if I think those dots are too soft looking, I can simply twirl open the brush profile, grab the white and move it progressively to the right, and you see the closer I get to the right hand side, the sharper those dots look. I think a little bit of softness is probably appropriate here. Let's just reduce that width maybe down to 30, and we can increase that spacing, I think, probably up to about there. Then what we need to do is we need to adjust that cutter so it looks a bit more suitable for this particular use. Let's reduce the points down to 4. That's not too bad, but obviously we've got this sort of sharp leading edge and we don't really want that. Let's reset the angle to 0. Let's twirl open the circle itself, come to its mask, Command 2 for the library, filters, blur, and let's select radial blur and apply it to the mask. And F3 for the inspector. We don't need a very large angle, probably just about 15 will be enough. And I think you can see now if I zoom in the difference between on and off just gives us a little bit more softness going into that hard edge there. So that's my first set of dots. We could adjust that rate again, just have a little bit of variance. Let's go for -175. And then let's close that up. Let's duplicate it, Command D, and call it dots inner. F1 for its scale transform, and we'll scale it down till it sits inside there between those other two. And we could probably just to keep everything looking different, maybe increase the number of points there, or possibly even reduce it. Let's reduce it to 3, that's better. Okay, so now I want to make yet another variety of ring effect. So let me close down dots inner, let's select blade outer again and duplicate it, Command D, and let's call it blade lozenges. Don't know really why, but it'll do as a name. So let's move that to the top again, Command Shift backward square bracket. So first of all, let's just shrink it down, bring it down in scale till it's somewhere about that, like that. And I want to this time increase the size of that shape width. So let's increase that shape width, something like that. And then again, I want to select brush type, airbrush. Twirl open the brush profile, make this really nice and sharp in this instance, and let's increase the spacing. So let's turn off that existing image mask for the time being. Let's duplicate the circle, so Command D. Let's call that circle cutter, just so we know, and delete its image mask. And then let's add a new image mask to our original circle. So let's call this circle lozenges, just so we keep track of what's what. I'll add a new image mask to that, so Command Shift M, and I'll use circle cutter. Circle cutter, let's set the brush type back to solid, and let's reduce the width. So now if we zoom in a bit on that so you can see what's happening, as I reduce the width, I'm kind of cropping in on those and we get that sort of lozenge effect. I think I'd also like those lozenges to be a bit chunkier, so let's come back to the circle lozenges. Let's increase the width. I think quite a lot. Let's come to our circle cutter and just increase the width of that a bit more. Something like that. So let's look at what we're going to do with that second image mask. At the moment we can see that it's populated by the cutter, but actually we want to be doing something quite different. Let me in fact take that rate and apply it to that blade lozenges group, because that's where we want it, and we can in fact delete the cutter. What I want to do is I want to move this image mask above the first one, so that's command backward square bracket, pops it above, and I want to change its mask blend mode to subtract. Then I want to take my circle cutter and duplicate it, so that's command D. I'll call it circle detail, and let's just turn it on so we can see what we're seeing. Let's come down to the outline, first point offset here, and if I type a value of 50, you'll see that we've got a semicircle. And I'm just going to increase the width to 150 as well. Then I'm going to drag that into that second image mask well, and I'll turn it on. And that's resulted in us cutting away half of those lozenges. Let's come to the library, command 2, filters, blur. Let's select radial blur and apply it to the circle detail. And F3 for the inspector. Let's set an angle of about 120. And let's come into the shape and let's reduce that opacity down to 90%, or maybe 95. So now you can see I'm just getting a little bit of shading on that, and that is going to look something like that. Just a little bit more interesting. Right, let's close up blade lozenges. And let's make a new group above it, command shift N. Let's take all this blade stuff and move it into that group, and let's call it rotators or something like that, just so we know what that includes. And let's close that on down. So I want to make one final component, so let's make a new group, command shift N. So I'm going to hit R for the rectangle tool, F7 for the HUD, turn off outline, turn on fill, and I'm going to draw a rectangle that's about a quarter of the width of the screen, like so. Height doesn't too much matter, just roughly like that. Close up the HUD, come to its transform and center it up for the time being. Let's come to the shape geometry. Now I can leave the Y value as is, but the X value I'm going to set to -240, 240, 240, -240, and that means that I've got a box that is exactly a quarter of the width of the screen. So 240 is half of 480, and 480 is a quarter of 1920. I'm sure you knew that already. So now I hit F1 to come to its position, and I'm going to set the X position to -720, and that puts it on the extreme left-hand edge of screen. Next I'm going to hit K to clone it, and then I'm going to select it again, clone it again, and select it again, clone it one more time. I'll select the top clone layer and type a value of 720, and that moves that across to the right hand side of the screen. Then I'm going to shift select that layer and the bottom layer, and then I'm going to come to Object, Alignment, and I'm going to select Distribute Horizontal Centers, and that has now distributed those boxes evenly across the frame. What I'm just going to do is come to their scale now and just reduce the X till we get a little bit of air between them. Let's go for 95. Then I'll make a new group, Command Shift N, and put that group into the new group I've just made. And I'm going to call this one Panels Outer. And I'm going to come to the group and set it to Fixed Resolution. Then I'll come to the library, Command 2, Filters, Distortion, and I'll select Polar and apply it to that Panels Outer group. And now you'll see I've got an interesting array of circular panels. Unfortunately, it's going outside the screen. So what I need to do is come to the inner group, F1, and if I drag down on Y, you'll see that I can reduce that and brings it inside the frame. So let's set that to minus 180, so we've got a nice round number. I'm going to take these layers inside and I'm going to reduce their Y scale till we get a narrower band, something like that. Then I'm going to select this group and clone it, so K to make a clone. Come to the library, Command 2, Filters, Blur, and I'll select Gaussian Blur and apply that to the clone. F3 for the inspector, and let's set it to 64. Then I want to add an image mask to the clone, so Command Shift M, and I'll take that original group and use that as the mask source. And now I've got this rather nice sort of soft glowing effect. If we zoom in a little bit, you can probably see that better. We can probably increase that value, maybe even up to 100, maybe even 125. Let's go crazy. Okay, then I'm also going to come to my original rectangle and just increase the roundness so I get a little bit more kind of corner interest. And that looks good. Then I'm going to come to its properties, blending opacity. I'm going to select that, right click, add parameter behavior, randomize. I'm going to set the amount to 50% and the apply mode to subtract. And if I play that, you'll see that panel is now flickering like a light panel, like that. So I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and drag that randomize to apply to each of those clones. Then I'm going to go down, hit the Generate Random Seed button a couple of times, come down another couple of times, come down, and again. And now those panels are all flickering independently, and that's quite a nice effect. Let's close that up. Let's turn back on our rotators group. And it's a little bit too big really for our design, so let's just scale that rotators group till it sits inside our panels. And actually I think that panels is probably too wide, so again let's select all of those panel layers in there and reduce that Y value down to 30, I think. And that gives us a little bit more space to play with our inner rotators. So now everything together is looking like that. What I'll also do is take panels outer and duplicate it, Command D, and I'll call it panels inner. And I'll come to its properties, transform, scale, and just scale it down so it sits inside everything else. And while we're at it, let's turn back on our plasma layer. And again, let's just scale it down till it sits right in the middle. And now our overall effect looks like that. So I'm also going to take my rotators group and clone that. So I'm going to hit K, and let's move that new group that it's made all the way behind everything else. So that's Command Shift /bracket. And let's call this Halo or something. Let's scale that up so it scales outside. So we're somewhere like that. Let's come to the library, Command 2, Filters, Blur, and let's select Zoom Blur and apply that to that Halo group. F3 for the inspector. Let's crank that value up. 25 should do it. And let's select the Halo group and just reduce its opacity down to about 10%. So now we're getting something like that. Now I don't know if you can see it if I zoom in. There's something a bit screwy about this plasma layer. Let me just open that up. What I actually need to do is set this plasma group to be fixed resolution, and that'll sort out the problem of that radial blur. However, there's still a bit of aliasing on these elements. So what I'm going to do is select each of these circles And I'm going to increase the width to 10. And that more or less takes care of that issue. So that's at 100% and you can't really see it. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to add some color correction. And first of all, let's zoom out. I want to do a little bit of organization of some of these elements. So I'm going to make a couple of new groups at the top here. Command-Shift-N. First one I'm going to call blue. Command-Shift-N. Call this one red. I'm going to take my panels inner and drag it into the red group. Panels outer and the rotators, the plasma and the halo are all going to go into the blue group. In actual fact, I'll make a third group, Command-Shift-N, and I'll call it green. And I'll come to my rotators and I'll take those dots, inner and outer, and I'll add them to the green group. So now I'll come to my blue group, Command-2 for the library, filters, color correction, colorize, and apply that to the blue. F3 for the inspector, where it says remap black, let's make sure that's set all the way down to black. Remap white, let's set that to a blue color, something like that. And let's take that colorize that we've just made and Alt or Option drag it to the red group. Click on the remap white swatch and drag that over till we've got a red. And similarly, we'll Option drag that onto the green group. Click on the remap white swatch and we'll drag that over till we've got green in those dots. Then I want to add a glow to this blue group, so Command-2, filters, glow, add a glow. F3 for its controls. Let's just reduce that threshold down to 0.2. In actual fact, I think I want to just have that on the panels outer because I think that's overcooking everything else. So let's just drag that onto panels outer instead. That keeps everything nice and crisp and clean in the middle. Let's just tweak that blue colorize a little bit to get it all looking a bit more vibrant. Let's click on the remap black and just let's get this to be quite a nice saturated blue. There you go, I think that brings the whole thing to life a bit more. And there was a step that I have forgotten to show you that has already been done, and that's where I adjusted the opacity of some of these rotator elements just to give a little bit more contrast. So like that lozenges I reduced down to about 50%. That inner one I've left at 100% to be nice and bright. To really just play with these till you get something that looks suitably bright and punchy, but if everything's bright and punchy then nothing is, because you've got no point of reference. So just play with those values depending on your own design. And the final step is to show you how we'd go about animating this on and off. I'm just going to show you this in broad terms and you can really refine the techniques for yourself. So first of all, I'm going to come to frame 6 and I'm going to take the red group and I'm going to hit I on the keyboard and that'll make that red only start at 6 frames. Then I'll come to 12 frames, I'll select the green group and again I'll hit I. So we have those two switching on at 6 and 12. But the main animation is going to be in this blue group. So if we select that, Command-2 for the library, filters, distortion, we're going to add the bulge filter to that blue group. F3 for the inspector. Let's set the scale to 2. Make sure we're at our first frame. Let's hit the keyframe button and set that amount to 1000. And you'll see what that's done. If I turn that on and off, that's shrunk that down. But as we step through, you'll see it's doing much more interesting things than that. So if we go to frame 2, I'll set this amount to 360. You can see how that's deformed that in a very interesting way. Skip forward another 2 frames to frame 4, and we'll set the value to 180. Skip forward another 2 frames to frame 6, set the value to 600. Skip forward another 2 frames to frame 8, set the value to 240, skip forward another 2 frames, frame 10, set it to 480, skip to frame 12, and let's set the value to 0. And now if we do a quick RAM preview, you can see how that creates this dynamic switch on effect. Obviously you could step into that group and apply a separate bulge animation to each of those elements or groups of those elements, but really that gives you the overall idea. And to animate it off, you simply do the same process in reverse. In my example, I've used some lens flares as well, just to add a bit of extra punch and interest. I've also done a bit more work on the grading, added an unsharp mask to some of the elements, and added a few more elements as well, just to make it a little bit more busy. But really, the design is down to you, now you've seen how the basic elements work. Okay, I hope that's been an interesting tutorial, and thanks very much indeed for watching. Hope to see you again soon.